So my wife and I were talking about some cars that we've had since we've been together. We've been together for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now. I know I should know that off the top of my head. I should be able to just rattle it off, but don't tell her. I'm pretty sure, though, that it's been 9 years that we've been together, 8 that we've been married. Don't quote me on that. But regardless, we've been through the ups, the downs, straight out of the gate. You know, we had a lot of stuff going on, so we were broke. She had a Volvo S40 when we met. It was a 2007. It was blue, and it was a solid car. But I love my wife to death, and I'm not saying anything bad about her, but she had some suspension problems with that car. And when I started to drive, I drove it the first time. I was like, my God, I can't believe you're driving this thing. It's awful. It sounded like the whole front end was getting ready to fall out from under the car. And so I worked at a buy here, pay here lot dealership at the time. I'm not going to say the name of it, but it was in Bessemer, Alabama. And it was an interesting place. If you're unfamiliar with Birmingham, Bessemer is on the west side of Birmingham. And when I went through the police department, when I worked for them, they would always call the west side of Birmingham the Wild Wild West, because it was just nuts. And so we started out on a tough situation. Like I said, we were flat broke, didn't have any money, and she had that car and it had suspension problems. I took it over to the shop one day because the way that the dealership worked where I was at was the owner would go to the auction and he would buy cars wrecked. And he would take those cars and he would take them to his repair shop. They would fix it, get it right, and then they'd bring it over to the dealership and we'd sell them. Now, those cars weren't the greatest cars in the world, but everyone knew when they were buying them that they were rebuilt cars. I wasn't trying to lie to anybody or anything like that, so everybody knew. And so I took her car over there, got the front end fixed for relatively cheap, and drove it for a little while, but it started having more issues, and basically whoever had it before just ran that thing through the ringer. It was awful. And Volvos, they have a reputation of being really, safe cars, and they are really safe, but in order to own a Volvo, you have to have quite a bit of money to put back into it, because they have mechanical issues, especially from that year range, from the 2000s and so on. They have a lot of mechanical issues. And so that car started having problem after problem, and we ended up, our solution to that was to buy another Volvo. We bought a Volvo wagon. I think it's called like a V70 or something like that. And we took the S40 and finally sold it. And from that money, from that S40, I found a 1993 Buick Regal in Birmingham. I don't exactly remember where we got it from, but it was this little neighborhood. I found it online on Facebook. They were asking like $1,500 for it. It was 93 and it had 170,000 miles, which if you're not familiar with GM products, that's a lot, especially from that era, the 90s and the 2000s. That's a lot. And but I didn't care. My whole mentality is that I wanted a car that had raced in NASCAR from back in that period. And I was looking for a Grand Prix, but they're next to impossible to find in decent shape. And because they were junk. They were cool looking cars, but they were junk. Let's just be real about it. And but I found that Buick. I talked them down to $1,000. And they told me this thing had been garage kept. And from cosmetically, it looked really good. It looked like it had been garage kept. And I could tell when I drove it that the struts in the back, or the suspension in the back, was wore out and needed to be replaced. Not a big deal. $1,000 car, that runs up and down the roads, so whatever. That car spent more time broken down at our apartment complex than it did going up and down the road during the tenure that I owned it. It had so many different issues. It got to a point where it was like, I believe the fuel pump was going out on it, but I think it had something else as well. But the closest shop to us was Express Oil Change. Not necessarily a place that you want to go to have mechanical work done. Now they do oil changes and everything, fantastic. But my experience with the ones around town there was not very good. So, but the closest one was an Express. So, and it was right down the hill. So we lived on top. If you're familiar with Birmingham, there's a statue up there. It's called the Vulcan. And it's just a guy holding a torch. Okay. But that's on top of, I think, Red Mountain. And we lived right below it. And Express was at the bottom of the mountain. So what I would do, the car would run long enough for me to get to the edge of the hill and basically coast all the way down to the shop. Like, it was, and if there was a light, sorry, I was just going through it. You know, couldn't take a chance of stopping and not getting it rolling again. So I took it down there one day, and they replaced the fuel pump, and I went and picked it back up. They called me, they're like, hey man, this thing's ready to go. Now, keep in mind, when I drove it down there, it wouldn't run at all. And they're like, yeah, it's ready to go. So I go down there to pick it up, and I pay them, and I go out to the parking lot, and I get in it. The thing wouldn't even pull itself out of the parking spot. Nothing had been fixed that I brought it down there for. They replaced a whole bunch of other crap that I never told them to replace that had nothing to do. And it's like, how do you not notice when you pull the car out of the garage bay and pull it over to the parking spot that it's not running? How do you not notice that? It should be immediately obvious. And so anyways, we drove that thing. We moved from Birmingham to Mobile not long after we got together. And I drove it down here, finally got it running halfway decent, and drove it down here, but then I didn't realize it had a transmission leak. Transmission pan was separated from the actual car. Someone had left that loose. I can only imagine who. And so leaked transmission fluid the entire time. I had to stop like five different times on the way down here to put transmission fluid in it. God, it was awful. So we ended up selling it. But I was thinking about that car earlier today. You know, I miss it. Like, yes, it was terrible. Yes, it was awful. It wouldn't run. AC didn't work in it either. And then the way that thing was built, it had no airflow coming inside the car. Awful. Awful. But I miss that thing. So if you see a Buick Regal from like 1993, 92, 94, let me know. Shoot me a link to it, man. Because like, I'd like to have another one, to be honest with you. So if you find my rambling about motorsports, cars, or anything else I feel like talking about interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, turn on notifications, the works. If you're interested in diecast cars, t-shirts, hats, auto parts, anything like that, check out our eBay. The link is in the description. Speaking of the eBay, though, we have a whole bunch of stuff on there. So it's not just racing. It's, you know, if your wife's looking for something, what have you, check it out. And if you see something you're interested in, just shoot me an offer, and we'll go from there. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. But speaking of the police department, police academy, and all that kind of stuff that I went through, and this was several years ago. It's probably back in the early teens, something like that. A portion of the police academy, okay, is they teach you how to do like pursuits, like you're in a vehicle, you're chasing the bad guy. They teach you all the aspects of that. But the way that they had it set up is we would go out to the shooting range, and we'd be out there for 2 weeks. 1 week, one half of the class is doing the driving, the other half's doing shooting, getting trained on how to shoot. And then, you know, at the end of the first week, they'd switch over. Now, you got an award at the end of the academy for being the highest in class for shooting and for driving. And the way that they graded driving was, so they had obstacle courses set up with cones. And you'd have to go through these as fast as possible. They would clock your time, and that's how they kept track of everybody. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but when we started, no one knew anything about me. We were all just, you know, no one knew each other. We're just getting used to being there. And so we went, and I was out there the first week driving. And these people, my fellow classmates, had started taking bets on whether I'd even be able to see over the steering wheel. much less be competitive in the obstacle courses. But they zipped that up real quick, because the first pass in the first obstacle course, I was like a second and a half faster than everybody else. And it just kind of went on that way throughout the entire time. And then I started hearing them, talking about, well, Forrest is the person to beat. He's the person to beat. And then I was out front by a lot. Get down to Friday, the last day, and they had a big obstacle course set up. But I had already done the same course earlier in the week. Nailed it. And went out there when the money was on the line, and I drove through every cone in that stupid obstacle course. Every one. The cars were all wore out Crown Victorias. They had been, 300, 400,000 miles on them. They were absolutely wore out. And they didn't have any mirrors. The belts wouldn't adjust, so when you got buckled in, however you're sitting, that's how you're in the car. You can't move until you unbuckle yourself. And so you had to do most of it by memory and feel from where you were. At least in my case, because I am short and I couldn't see over the back of the car. And so that's not an excuse. I just choked, man. I went out there and I ran over all the stupid cones. But it was cool because the cars, since they were old and wore out, they didn't really care, what you did to them, as long as you didn't deliberately tear one up. So we'd go out there, at least I would go out there, and we'd, you'd go through the obstacle course, and then you'd have to throw it in reverse and go back through it in reverse. And, I'd throw that thing it's automatics. I'd throw that thing into reverse while it's still going forward, trying to get the back tires to light up and get going, and good times. And so from that, my nickname for the rest of the academy was Alfa Romeo. I'm not exactly sure why or where that came from, but there you have it. So my nickname is Alfa Romeo, and it has been ever since then. So, hey, which is fine. Those are cool cars. As Jeremy and James and Richard would say on Top Gear, they're beautiful cars, all of them. Mechanically, kind of terrible. But anyways, Franco Colapinto apparently crashed in practice. Formula One driver who drives for Alpine. Not practice, but testing. And my question is why is Franco still in that car? Why is he still in that car? They had Jack Doohan in that car to open up the season, I think, for first 3 or 4 rounds, and then they replaced him with Franco. And Franco's not performed. He's had crashes. He's usually down at the bottom of the running order, while his teammate Pierre Gasly is, it's quite a bit faster. I'm not going to say that Pierre sets the world on fire, but also the Alpine car is not very good. And so that's the thing I don't understand is they threw Jack in that car. He's a rookie, and they basically painted him into a box. They're like, look, I understand you're a rookie, but you've got to perform, because they hired Franco after they hired Jack. So they really wanted Franco in the car to start with, but they'd already had the deal with Jack. So but I just don't understand, what has Franco shown that says that he's any better than Jack Doohan is? I just don't see it, me personally. I mean, I could be missing something, but, if they replace Franco, who are they going to put in the car? Are they going to put Jack back in it? I doubt it. Should they? Probably. It'd probably be more along the lines of like Valtteri, Bottas. But Bottas is in the rumor mill to go to Cadillac next year, in their first year in Formula One. So it'd be interesting to see if that's the case, if it's true that Cadillac is interested in hiring Valtteri, if they would allow him to run Alpine. I guess at the very least, if they do, they could get some kind of information on what Alpine's doing, even though it's the worst team in Formula One right now. I don't know why you'd really be overly concerned with what they're doing. But, I just think the time has come for Franco to be sacked and replaced. And like I said, if I had my way, I'd put Jack back in the car. Obviously I don't have any sway in that conversation, but if I did, I'd put Jack back in the car, straight out of the gate. Also, I was on the right path yesterday when I was talking about Caden Honeycutt being released from Nice in the NASCAR Truck Series. I didn't know at the time. I seen some rumors, and it had been, going back and forth, but it's official now that he will, in fact, after this weekend at Watkins Glen, run the rest of the season for Stewart Friesen. If you're not familiar with what happened, most people are by now, but if you're not familiar with what happened, Stewart had an accident in a dirt car, I guess, about a week ago now, and broke his pelvis. I think he fractured both of his legs. He's a lucky boy, because that accident, we've seen accidents like that before in dirt cars. The flipping over is not the problem. The flipping over is never a problem. That's one thing. I want to touch on that, because the media outlets, they did the same thing when Jason Leffler had his accident. They make it out like, oh my God, the flips are terrible and horrible. Now, although they're not good at all, if you're racing on dirt, if you crash, you're going to flip over. That's just part of it. That's just that happens. It's just the nature of being on that kind of surface. And it really doesn't matter what kind of car you're driving. So if you see someone have an accident on dirt, unless it's a fluke accident where they can somehow save it or whatever, they're going to flip over. Okay, the flipping over is not the problem. In Jason's case, the sudden stop was the problem. In Stewart's case, coming off the wall, landing in the middle of the racetrack, and getting hit by another car was a problem. And it's the same thing that happened with Brian Clausen quite a few years ago, where he had flipped over, was sitting in the middle of the racetrack, and got hit. It's one of the most dangerous accidents in motor racing, is being stationary and getting clobbered by someone who's at full song. We've seen accidents like that in NASCAR, ARCA, Formula One, the feeder series for Formula One. It usually doesn't end well. I could rattle off several people. Eric Martin in ARCA in 2002, similar deal. Forgive me for, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but the French guy who was killed in, I think, was it Formula 2 at Spa a couple years ago. Forgive me for not being able to think of his name. I'm drawing a blank right now, but and no disrespect to him, because the kid was awesome. But it turns out that Caden's going to be in that truck for the rest of the season. And so I guess that just illustrates the point that I was thinking, maybe since he signed with a new OEM, and that they were going to release him, that potentially it was Dodge that he signed with, but I think it's looking more and more like he signed with Toyota. And so if he's with Toyota, then who's he going to drive for next year? I have a guess. I think it's a pretty educated guess, just aesthetically looking at the situation. Corey Haim's going to be moving up next year. He's not going to be in trucks full time, okay? That happens, that 11 truck for Tricon is going to be open, and I could see Caden going there. He could still very well go to Dodge. You just don't know, but I would say Tricon's more of a logical landing spot for him, if I had to guess. I don't know. It's just a guess, but it'd be cool. It'd be cool to see him in something like that, something that's capable of running up front, because I firmly believe that Honeycutt's got the ability to be a champion in the truck series, 100%. He's shown legitimate speed in Al Nisa's trucks, and those are not necessarily what I would say to be, it's not the top team in the series, what I'm trying to say. So, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But anyways, I got to tell you guys one quick story that happened yesterday. So, my father had a 1950 Studebaker Commander when he passed away. And my mother, she remarried, and so, not immediately after, but my mother remarried, and so she was going to move in with her husband. So the car was pushed out in the woods out behind the house. And Mom was just going to leave it there, and I didn't really care for it to be left out in the woods. I didn't want something to happen to it. If no one's at the house, then anybody can come by there while she's not paying attention or she's not there and hook up to it, and it'll be gone. So I paid to have it towed from Birmingham down here to Mobile. And it's like a 5-hour drive. You want to talk about heavy car, by the way? That thing is massively heavy. It's a huge car. The whole front end is disassembled. We have all those parts for it, but the front end is disassembled. And so it's a super heavy car. And so we get that thing down here and we put it over next to my wife's garden, and it's basically going to be a central piece of the garden because it's so far gone. The car, I know for a fact it hasn't been driven in at least 35 years, at least. The engine's been exposed to the elements. So, I mean, if you wanted to, you could go in there and you could rework if you had a machine shop and metalworking shop and stuff, and you could get it back going. But, you know, they're not overly expensive cars. I think for what you would spend getting that thing back right and good enough to drive on the road, you just go buy one. I think it'd make more sense to do that. But the sentimental attachment for me, because it was my father's, it's never going anywhere. But the bumpers, like even if we were to put it back together, I would have shaved bumpers because I like the way that looks more so than the stock massive chrome bumpers on the front and the back. So I had a friend who was in the process of rebuilding one himself, and he needed a bumper. So I gave him the front bumper from that one, and he put it on his car. And here's a picture of it right here. And he put it on that car. They got it cleaned up. It had some surface rust on it, and they got rid of all that. And I got to tell you, it looks fantastic. And it was an emotional moment for me seeing it, being put to good use. And it's just cool. It'd be cool. My dad would be tickled to death because we had conversations about that car several times, and his intentions were, we had a frame from, I can't remember what kind of car it was, but it was a newer car, and we had the frame taken out from under it. There was nothing there, just the frame and the engine and the suspension. And his intent was to take the stud, cut the body off of it, which is why the whole front end is disassembled. Take the body off and put it on a newer frame, and then kind of go from there, because Studebaker parts are stupid expensive. If you can find them, because a lot of that stuff you can't find. And so you put it on a newer car, that problem's basically gone. And so that was the intent, but we never got around to it, and before he passed. So car just sat and was rusting away and rotting away. And now the car itself is being put to good use because my wife loves the fact that it's part of the garden. And, and I get to walk outside and look at it every day, and it's nostalgic for me. And now a friend of mine's got the front bumper and works for them. It's just a really cool thing, man, seeing something like that being used and going up and down the road. It's stud, man. Studebakers are cool cars. I think they folded not super long after the war, if I remember the timeline correctly. I know they merged with, I can't remember if it was Packard or if it was one of those, Hudson or something like that, and ended up becoming AMC. But the true, I think they actually, now that I'm saying that, they merged with Packard because they still were making both, but I believe the studs, the later model studs, were actually, or vice versa. One of the cars was just rebadged versions of the other instead of actually being like a true, I think it was Packard actually. Anyways, it's just cool. Cool to see it going. And like I said, I love studs. I love Packards too, by the way. Those are some really cool cars. And I will forever be holding a grudge against the state of Michigan for not saving the Packard plant. I know it was really far gone, and I know there were efforts to save it over the years. Those all eventually fell through, and now they're bulldozing. They may have already been done bulldozing it, but that is an actual crying shame. Anyways, if you enjoy listening to me ramble about cars, motorsports, or anything like that, make sure to like, or anything I feel like talking about, I should say, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, turn on notifications. The works if you're interested in die-cast cars, t-shirts, hats, auto parts, anything, home decor, lamps, lamp shades, basically any and everything. Check out our eBay. The link is in the description. If you see something you're interested in, shoot me an offer, and we'll go from there. Follow us on Facebook and X for more motorsports content. Those links are in the description. As always, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Till next time, God bless. Peace.